is not legal or psychological advice. Listening does not create a professional relationship with Split Up or any guests. Launi and Robert are only licensed in the state of Arizona. For legal or mental health concerns, please consult a licensed professional in your state. Guest identities may be changed for privacy.
Hi, and welcome to Split Up. Today we're going to be talking about Justin and Hailey Bieber's divorce and custody and all that stuff. I'm Launi Sheldon, and I'm an Arizona family law attorney.
And I'm Robert DiCarlo. I'm an Arizona psychologist.
So there's no official announcement yet, right? I mean, there's just rumors flying that Hailey and Justin are going to be getting divorced. And they got married in 2018. So it's been about 7 years, which honestly is longer than I thought it would last. Only because I know Robert's not into this, the nosy stuff like I am. The I don't know, what is it, pulp culture nosiness? I don't know, but Robert's not into it. I'm making him do this. So thank you, Robert, for doing that today.
Hey, I'm here for the ride. And, divorce isn't just about ending a marriage. It's about what happens next. So we're going to be breaking down child custody, parenting schedules, a professional career and lifestyle and how that impacts parenting, and how perhaps a postnuptial agreement might shape financial splits in the future.
Yeah, so let's kind of break it down. So first of all, Justin and Hailey did not have a prenuptial agreement. They had a postnuptial agreement, which is a contract that gets signed after marriage. And the rumor is that they ran to the altar really quick because Justin's visa was expiring. But that's just a rumor. I don't know. But so they didn't get the prenuptial agreement done, though they did get a postnuptial agreement done. And so it's a little bit different, but it is a contract that'll discuss how they would divide assets and money at the end of a marriage. It helps avoid fights over the money. Justin is worth, and I think we looked it up, Justin is worth about $300 million and Hailey's worth about $200 million. So the prenup probably says something like Justin's keeping his music catalog, tour earnings, and businesses. Hailey's going to keep her income from modeling, endorsements, and brand deals. And then probably they waived spousal maintenance. I don't think they need it with that kind of income, but we'll get down to the child support in just a bit.
Yeah, and I can't really speak to the legal aspects of a postnuptial or prenuptial agreement, but from the psychological perspective and dealing with clients who are managing high stress situations in relationships and in marriages, I would imagine that having a postnup could reduce stress because it might eliminate some of that financial insecurity that a parent may feel, or uncertainty rather. So instead of fighting over money, they can really focus on upbringing of their children or child and co-parenting issues.
Yeah, when people are fighting over money, oftentimes the kid stuff gets kicked in with it, right? So if the money part's gone, then they're just dealing with the kid stuff, and that's a lot easier to handle. So California is a big 50-50 state, but they aren't, like, I don't think they're as big a 50-50 state as Arizona. I think they're willing to stray a little bit from that. And Robert, I have questions for you because I feel like I have so many questions for you on so many levels in this case. But first of all, like, if Justin's touring, how do you get, parenting time with that? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I can speak from the perspective of, just generally how a professional career may impact parenting. And I've never done an evaluation that's involved a parent who's touring or gone for extended periods of time. But I'd imagine if I had a case in front of me where I had to evaluate parenting time, I'd be looking at the child's adjustment to that lifestyle. So it's not a direct comparison to other types of families. If a child is used to being on the road with a parent and perhaps they have resources and offsets like maybe a tutor or they're doing online schooling, all of that has to be looked at in the context of that family system. Perhaps that's something they've always done or something that they're implementing on a new level. In any event, it's really about the child's adjustment to that lifestyle and how they would transition to the care of the other parent during those periods of touring. Or, I'd imagine that a close proxy to that would be military families. So when you have a parent who's away for a deployment for, 12, 24, 36 months, you'd be dealing with similar dynamics, except perhaps the inability to have more contact. So I would want to look at that on a case by case basis, Lonnie.
And if I were the attorney in something like that, and again, I'm the pop cultural weirdo, but Taylor Swift specifically took, she would spend an amount of time touring and then she'd take a few weeks off or whatever. And I wonder if during that time, maybe if I were the attorney, I would say, look, Bieber's going to get little Jack for those weeks while he's off or whatever, however much time he wants him, or maybe a nanny flies him out. And again, like Robert said, it would just kind of depend on what they'd been doing. Like, is this kid flying with nannies regularly? I mean, they have a boatload of money, so maybe he has his own plane. I don't know. But if a nanny can bring little Jack to the concerts or whatever, maybe that's something that can happen too. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, as you were speaking, Lonnie, it made me think of other offsets or benefits that a child might benefit from in that sort of lifestyle and that sort of family structure. So perhaps one argument might be, they're missing time with the other parent or maybe missing time in school, but they may also be gaining life experiences that have additive value too. So maybe they're exposed to travel and different cultures and different experiences. And you really, again, have to look at those all in the context in which they occur. So are these offsets benefiting the child? Are they an unhelpful trade-off? Perhaps they're not getting enough exposure to the other parent who had otherwise been a very involved parent, and maybe now their time has been restricted. All of that history and context matters.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts on, say, virtual parenting in that situation? And can you give me some age brackets? So like little Jack, I don't even think he's a year old, like maybe he's 6 months. So, and I know a judge just ordered like a 6-month-old in Arizona courts to have like daily FaceTime with their parent. So what are your thoughts on, and talk about that too, by the way, because my initial thought is that's so stupid because, what's that baby going to do? But I also talked to my babies when they were in my belly, right? And I know they recognized my voice, and I know they recognized their dad's voice when they came out. So I'm assuming it's kind of like that, right? I mean, I think they can still bond even if it's just to the voice, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's not an all or nothing equation. When I look at video parenting time or telephonic contact with the parent, these are not replacements for parenting time and direct contact that would foster attachment and bonding. But that doesn't mean that there's not value in them. What I would look at in terms of advising a family or a parent on those types of contacts with their child is the age and development of a child. If we have a very young child or even an infant, they're obviously going to have a limited attention span. They may not be able to tolerate longer durations of calls or video calls. They may get bored or frustrated easily, and then there could be diminishing returns on that call. So the time they spend together could actually be more frustrating than positive and fulfilling for the child. So you would, again, have to consider the age and development of the child. On the other end of the spectrum, I've had issues with teenagers having a really difficult time on video calls because it's not their social or peer group, it's their parent. And they can resist for different reasons. And everything in between. And so, again, you want to look at, how the specific individual child is responding. You want to look at their age and development, and you want to look at what is the additive value of having these calls. A call here and there, to supplement parenting time, I think can be a really positive thing. If it creates a lot of tension and frustration and intolerance for the child, then that would have to be looked at more closely.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, of course, they're all different. I mean, even within the family, the siblings can be different. One parent might be willing, or one child might be willing to yak all day with a parent, and the other kids might want nothing to do with it. Right.
Right. And some parents are more skillful at using FaceTime or video calls or telephone calls. They may know how to engage the child in ways that another parent might not be able to. So the parents may not be created equal in that way. And I've had some parents that get on the calls and they're just they're so frustrated and irritated with their child not engaging with them that they miss the point of the call. And so ways of engaging, and when we do types of therapy like some reunification work, we come up with creative solutions if the parents need video contact. But again, those things, they could be based and dependent on that parent and that child's skill set.
That's a great point. And I think that's probably, we could do a whole podcast on that, because I've had parents where one parent will just read to them out of like a joke book or a Bible or something, and to keep the kids like on the phone longer, even though their 15 or 20-minute time period is up. They just want to continuously try and sort of take up that time. And I always argued in my case that no, that wasn't appropriate, that if it's 15 minutes and it's engaging both people, then fine. But if it's just one parent just going off and not stopping the conversation or actually having a conversation, then I'm saying no.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was referring to with the parent skillfulness. If they can be really attuned to their child and realize that a 2 or 3 minute high quality call versus a 15-minute call that's low quality and just runs out the clock, those two situations and experiences are going to feel very different for the child. And if the parent is truly tuned into that child, I'd be more interested in from the evaluative standpoint of how that parent is responding and adapting to that child's needs, as opposed to whether they're fulfilling a 15-minute phone call just to check off a box.
Now, and I always wonder this, because sometimes parents will have that conversation, like they'll have it set in stone. And again, I know I'm kind of going off the Bieber thing. I just, because I'm getting hung up on this for a second. What do you think about the flexible time, or should there be a time specific for the phone calls?
Gosh, that's going to be really dependent on the parent or the co-parent's cooperation and ability to communicate. I could see a very fluid and flexible schedule being really beneficial if the parents are highly collaborative or the co-parents are highly collaborative. And responsive to the other parent, being able to pick up and take a phone call on short notice or spontaneously could be really positive for everybody. But if there's a lot of tension and conflict in that co-parenting relationship, you probably are going to look for something with a little bit more structure, such as a designated time to call. That might also be just a logistical issue. If a parent's on tour and they're only available during certain times, and furthermore, they may be dealing with time zone differences where it may be bedtime in one time zone and early morning in another. These are all things that would have to be considered.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, for definitely having to consider that in a case such as this, where you could have traveling. Another question I have about that same thing is, would you add a different section? I know I would, as an attorney. I would add a different section in the parenting plan from non-touring dates to touring dates, so that it would be very specific. And I would really talk to the parents ahead of time to determine really what they did before, if they worked together before. Because again, in this case, this child's super young. He hasn't toured with this kid yet. So I don't know that that's been a thing, and hopefully they'll stay together forever, and this is just a bad rumor. But I am wondering, I think as an attorney, I would want to add in a big section on touring, what that looks like, because I feel like that could be really problematic, especially if there's any allegations of Justin using drugs or alcohol again.
Absolutely. And Launi, I think that's a fantastic idea on the evaluative side too. If I were conducting a custody evaluation and I were writing a parenting plan, it would absolutely be dependent on the environment and context, much like how we have different schedules for different times of year. We have a regular school schedule, and then we have the summertime parenting schedule. I could see a family that has a unique circumstance, like a tour, being built in as a separate standalone section in the plan that supersedes the regular parenting time schedule. Again, some of those things may be variable. They may not be consistent from year to year or season to season. So how that works out logistically in a parenting plan, I'd imagine would be quite difficult. It would probably require revisiting the plan on a regular basis, and perhaps even having language in there that once every 6 months or every 12 months or even more often to revisit the specific plan as it relates to the travel or tour schedule. And Launi, you made another point about, if there are concerns about substance use, whether it's as a result of a parent traveling or being on tour, or just because there is a concern about a substance use disorder in a regular parenting plan, substance use issues absolutely can potentially, I should say, potentially impact parenting capacity. And that would be something as an evaluator I would look at in a family is to what degree is this parent's substance use impacting their ability to discharge regular parenting skills.
And we will definitely, if we haven't, I don't think we have, but we'll definitely be doing a specific podcast on substance abuse and substance use and how to make both parents comfortable when that happens. Okay, now I want to get down to the money part of it. So in our research, we found out that they are super rich, which I think everybody knew. But apparently, this is just kind of I didn't know that people made this much money for their music that they've already done, because I don't think he's like created new music. But the estimates were that Justin makes between $5 and $10 million a month
That is
for music,
phenomenal.
touring, and endorsements. So that's a lot. I mean, I suppose he could even just wear a shirt and probably get paid to wear the shirt. Like it could be something so obvious like that, like a hat. Everyone will want to wear the same hat, so maybe that's $1 million thing. And Hailey apparently makes a good income also between, say, 500,000 and $1 million dollars per month. So a lot of money floating around. And my understanding, again, I'm an Arizona lawyer, so my understanding in California is they don't have a limit on the amounts of child support paid. Like they don't have like a cap. Arizona doesn't, I mean, they kind of do. We have a table. Texas has the cap where it's like 3 kids is like $2,791 or something for 3 kids, even if the person's Elon Musk. So clearly a big difference. But California does not. So we kind of looked that up and determined that if she gets custody, and say it's 50-50, he could still be paying like $40,000 to $80,000 a month. And if she gets primary custody and he gets less time, that it could go, $100,000 a month or even higher. So that's pretty crazy. But Robert, one of the things I really want to talk to you about is when a child goes, and I think in law school we called it like from a mansion to slum or whatever. But what does that do to a kid? If a kid's got one house where there's maids and everything, lots of travel, one clearly much wealthier parent, private jets, and then the other parent is living, a fairly modest life, at least in comparison. What does that do to the kid?
Gosh, there's an argument to be made for variety and resiliency, right? Children in different environments and even switching environments can produce a different experience that has a lot of positive aspects. When I look at a case from an evaluative standpoint, and I'm evaluating, across the households, I'm looking for a lot of different things. One of them might be the consistency in parenting across the households, which may or may have nothing to do with wealth or resources and lifestyle even. The other aspect is looking at, how well a parent is able to, I would say, sort of match each other's ability to work with the child across a range of behaviors if they have behavioral issues. Again, these may have nothing to do with the actual, wealth or resources of the parent, but it may have everything to do with that. But I could see a child going from one environment that might feel wealthier, more resources, having staff waiting on them, to do their laundry, cook them meals, and they go to a home with less resources. They may develop a resentment or even an expectation or entitlement that when that's not fulfilled in the other household, that child may act out behaviorally, or they may have internalized behaviors, depression, anxiety, stress. It can just sort of alter the child's expectations and what they should or shouldn't be getting in each home. I think one of the areas that would be more important to assess and understand is the degree to which the parents are able to positively talk about the other parent and the other household and uplift it, regardless of what those resources might be.
Yeah, that makes sense. I always wondered that. Clearly, I've never had that issue. And probably most people in the world haven't had that issue, but it is an issue that tends to happen in California or places where there are more super wealthy people. And with California having such a huge population, and that's where a lot of Hollywood lives, I
Right.
could see that, becoming a problem, especially with cars and, just the foods that they're eating. If somebody's eating caviar and crab legs and lobster at one house and then going and having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, at the other house, I could see it could be difficult for a kid. I
Right,
mean,
but it's also subjective. What if the child likes peanut butter and jelly? They dislike crab, so you really have to get in and look at how the child is receiving and experiencing those two different households. And I think the contrast, how wide that contrast is. I mean, if you're talking about somebody who's has very limited economic resources versus a parent who has, almost unlimited resources, that contrast will probably be predictive of their experience versus, whether they get caviar versus crab leg between the two households because of, the difference between making $1 million a month and $10 million a month. So you have to look again at context always. You have to look at how wide that contrast is. But most importantly, how is the child experiencing those two differences and that adjustment going from home to home?
okay, here's something that I've never tried, but talking about it, it made me think that it would be an interesting argument in court. Because I've never ever thought of bringing in a psychologist to help me argue a child support case, especially if I wanted an upward deviation in child support. But I mean, psychologically, if it is a significant enough difference, might it affect a child psychologically? And if that's the case, is that something you would be willing to testify about?
It potentially could be something I would testify about. I would be looking at the parents' abilities to execute parenting responsibilities, again, which may or may not be a function of their resources. So, if both parents are able to provide a stable, structured, healthy, happy home to the child, more or less, to me, the resources or the resource gap is going to be less relevant. However, if one parent has all these luxurious resources and supports that effectively remove them from parenting. Perhaps, their nanny does 100% of the parenting. I'd be looking at who is the actual primary parent or caregiver here, and that would factor into the decision.
Okay, so I know I when you and I talked, I hadn't originally brought up the Diddy thing. Well, I brought it up and then I didn't bring it up, and now I'm bringing it up again. And so I know this is not your favorite part, but I think it's a good question that I can put to you. So there are a lot of allegations about Justin and Diddy and some possible abuse that might have, happened with Justin. And is there, I mean, I don't think he's friends with Diddy anymore. So if Diddy's arrested, then anything that happened in the past, unless he gets arrested, which I don't think I'm not making any allegations against Justin Bieber. I love him. I think he's adorable. But I'm just wondering, does any of that come into play if he had really so associated with someone with those kinds of allegations for so long, or had gone to the Diddy parties or anything like that? Would that, listen, it's in the news now. So, and I don't think it was a secret that he went to Diddy parties. I don't know that he did anything bad, and I don't think that he did anything bad. But does just that association, is that problematic, or what do you do in a case if somebody's bringing up those kinds of allegations to you?
Yeah, so this would be an interesting case as a custody evaluator. Let's say it was a high profile individual who, you're evaluating or you're evaluating their family system. the most important factor to consider is that media coverage can often include a lot of hype, speculation, misinformation. These people's lives are under the microscope, under the scrutiny of the public all the time. And so I would be really hesitant as an evaluator to rely on that information or speculative information. I'd be getting in and speaking to direct personal contacts, or what we call collaterals. I'd be reviewing their records. I'd be doing, lots and lots of clinical interviews of all the parties involved to really get an accurate picture of what's going on, which may or may not, relate to anything that we're reading about in the public media realm. But as to those past associations, whether it's Bieber, Justin Bieber, or any parent that I'm evaluating, it's really about what is the impact of that relationship on their current parenting. Perhaps they've had associations in the past with people that might potentially present a danger to the child if they were exposed to that child. But if the parent is appropriately protective and aware and using good judgment, to me, it's the more relevant piece of information, and the data I'd be looking at is to what degree are they able to provide a safe, protective environment for their child. And that may have nothing to do with past associations at all.
And Robert, you and I have had this conversation in a different context, where if somebody has joint legal decision making or legal decision making, that basically means that either you agreed as the other parent if it's agreed upon, or that the court found that this is a fit and appropriate parent to have legal decision making for this child. And so when you look at something like that, if I was Hailey's attorney, I would probably want to add something to the parenting plan. And if I did that, I'm assuming that Justin's attorney would come back and go, you already said he's a fit and appropriate parent. So if he's a fit and appropriate parent, he knows who the child should be around and who the child should not be around. And until there's a different issue, keep that to yourself, because we're going to assume that Justin is an appropriate parent. And so it doesn't matter how nervous Hailey gets about it. Once you're saying that a parent is a fit and appropriate parent, I mean, you're kind of saying that they're a fit and appropriate parent to make these kinds of decisions. And I think that you're kind of stuck with it then. Does that mean that you can't put it in there? No. Absolutely, I would be trying to say there is zero contact with Diddy. That I would definitely do that. But you also have to assume that if you're saying that he can have joint legal decision making, that he's a fit and appropriate parent.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it would be helpful to distinguish what's a legal decision versus what's a parenting decision. And I think parents often confuse those. So at least in Arizona, we view things like legal decisions as decisions about the child's religious upbringing, educational decisions, sometimes personal care decisions, and medical and behavioral decisions, exposing them to an individual who may have a sordid past, or somebody the other parent wouldn't agree should have contact with the child. Those are usually in the realm of day-to-day parenting decisions. And usually as a co-parent, you don't have purview or authority to tell the other parent what to do and not do during their parenting time. That doesn't mean that the parent will make safe, healthy, appropriate choices and decisions, but you're only saying the parent's fit until you're saying they're not fit, right? And so you may have said that initially in your petition or initially during the course of your custody evaluation, and ultimately the court agreed that the parties should have joint decision making or have equal custody or equal parenting time. But there could be changes in circumstances, in a case where somebody might have a past that raises some red flags, and that parent knew that those red flags existed and still put their child in that position. I would say the other parent might have a strong case, at least if they were trying to convince me as an evaluator that the other parent has used poor judgment, and therefore, we might need to look at custody or parenting time changes. That might be a persuasive argument.
I agree. I would argue that as an attorney, just again, best interest of the child. This is what it's about. It's not about controlling the other parent. It's not about hurting the other parent or being superior to the other parent. It's just literally about taking care of the child, making sure the best interest is happening for the child. So if Hailey and Justin, if Hailey and Justin do split, of course, it's going to be this huge high profile case. Of course, I'm going to try and force Robert to come back into it and discuss it again with me, because I am, a little nosy that way. But the real focus needs to be on the child. It needs to be on the little Jack. So hopefully if it happens, they'll move forward with co-parenting appropriately. And I don't see them fighting about it. I just don't. I don't think that those are going to be the fighting people. But I could be wrong. I mean, I could easily be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, co-parenting on its best day can be really challenging. I imagine the pressures of being in, the spotlight of media and the public probably really amplifies a lot of co-parenting issues. And we're not privy as the public to what goes on inside these co-parenting relationships or these high-profile divorces. But we can speculate that the stress is going to be compounded by the fact that, any misstep that they make becomes part of the public awareness. And that can make parenting and co-parenting a real big challenge. So to Launi's point, parents need to do the best they can to keep their children safe, comfortable, happy, healthy, really putting their best interest at the forefront of everything. And hopefully that supersedes financial disagreements, custody disagreements, and all the things that parents fight about that we know, Launi. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this topic.
All right. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for joining us, and join us again on Split Up. We'll come out every Tuesday afternoon or morning. Hopefully it'll be done by morning. And download the Split Up app if you need any help, assistance, information on your family law case.